Good evening, everyone. We will be waiting for 5 more minutes for everybody to join, and then we will start the session. Thank you for being patient.
Guys, we can start now. Also, if anyone is, like there are limited number of participants allowed on Google Meet, so we are also we are also live streaming this on YouTube on our channel. So a link will be floated soon, so you can also join in from there if you are unable to join from here, because I guess 100 or 150 is the limit. So just a note. Thank you. Khushi, the host, can you start, please? Thank you.
Okay. Before starting, we would like to request each one of you to mute yourself to avoid any background noise. We request the audience to be interactive throughout the session and drop all your questions in the chat box.
Oprah Winfrey rightly said, "Don't worry about being successful, but work towards being significant, and the success will naturally follow." Good afternoon, everyone. Khushikar Mehta and Vanshek Gupta welcome you all on behalf of Enyong, the entrepreneurship cell of Kirorimal College, Delhi University, to the inaugural event of the second edition of Debut Day Entrepreneurs on the topic Using Analytical Tools for Research and Analysis.
Here at Enure, we believe that inculcation of entrepreneurship skills in the student is of utmost importance. To build a better tomorrow, we must work hard today. Moreover, we firmly believe in providing opportunities to all to find their potential and be the very best version of themselves.
Moving forward, I would like to welcome on the stage our convener, Dr. Sameer Lama, who is currently serving as an assistant professor in Kirorimal College and has over 10 years of teaching and research experience. His areas include international business, accounts, and taxation. He's continuously serving for student welfare and has been honored with various awards. Over to you, sir.
Yes, am I audible there, Kushi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you are.
Thank you. Right. Yes, thank you, Kushi, and warm greetings to all of you present in this event. Firstly, on behalf of Kirodimal College, I would like to welcome all of you in this second annual event of the entrepreneurship cell of our college. Let me also congratulate the core team members of Entrepreneurship Cell for organizing this mega event, 3-day event, if I'm not wrong, right? And let me also welcome the speakers, our esteemed speakers for today, Vignesh, Mr. Vignesh Kamath, and Ms. Priyanshi Srivastava. I'm informed that the theme of this session is using analytical tools for research and analysis, right? Yesterday, I was just discussing in my class about the importance of research, right? I'll not take much time because our audience are, very keenly waiting for the speakers to share their opinions or their experience on this particular topic today. But as a convener of the society, and as a teacher particularly, there is research has gained significant attention over the last few years, not just in our country but across the world, right? And I keep telling this to our students, that if you want to excel in life, whichever field you would like to go, maybe academics, maybe corporate, maybe any sector that you take up, right, without doing research, without having that kind of curiosity, right, you'll not be able to achieve success in life. So research is very important for all of us, right? We need to constantly think about this, right? We need to find solutions to the problems, to the set of problems that lies before us, and for that we need to undertake research, right? For producing anything, right, we need to do research. And here we are talking about producing knowledge, right? To produce knowledge, again, we need to do research. And I think the speakers today would highlight on using certain tools, right, while we do research. I'm not very sure which tools they'll be taking up. They might discuss about some uh, sophisticated research tools like SPSS or EViews or SEM, other things, or advanced Microsoft Excel. I think we use that as well to do some kind of research analysis, right? Whatever it is, we must be able to understand two things. First is to undertake research, right? Why do we do research? And secondly, when we do research, what are the tools we can use in order to test our hypothesis, or to say that this is true, or this is not true, right? And to arrive at a set of conclusions, we need to use all these tools, and all these tools are very, very important. And I always tell my students that, you have a given curriculum by the university, by the college, which you have to study, which you have to write your exams, right? You'll have to prepare your assignments and everything that has been assigned to you. But that's fine. That's fine. That's what the university says, that you have to do all those things. That's fine, but that's not sufficient. Please believe in me. That's not sufficient. Other than that, you'll have to, explore all these things. You'll have to learn these techniques, right? Because the life after college, I think many of our students are here in the final year. Immediately after completing the graduation, they'll be some of them will be entering the job market. Some doing MBAs, and doing courses from foreign universities, and so on and so forth. For all this, again, research comes into picture. And if you have some skills, if you know all these techniques, certainly this is going to give you an edge. And this one word edge creates the difference, right? So welcome again to this particular event. I'm, I was a bit unwell today, and I was quite skeptic whether I'll be able to address you or not during this inaugural session. But yes, the president of ENOR kept messaging me since morning, sir, you have to be there at least for 1 minute or 2 minutes. And then I promised him, chalo, don't worry, I'll be there at least for 2 minutes so that he can have this event very well. So congratulations again, once again to Yes and the entire team for organizing this event. I hope this will be a great learning experience to all of you, particularly the, I'm sorry, the juniors. I think for them this is the first time that we are having this official event, but again we ensure that very soon we will have similar events, right? And we'll be inviting a lot of speakers to interact with all of you and to share their experiences, valuable experiences with all of you, so that ultimately you gain that edge that I was talking about. Once again, with this I welcome our both the speakers, Mr. Vignesh and Ms. Priyanshi, for sparing their valuable time with us. And I would also request them to, or our, in fact, any other team, to keep in touch with all these our valued, speakers, right? And try to gain something out of them and be in touch with them so that in future also, if we can have some kind of collaboration, related to any of the academic activities or, entrepreneurship events, right? In that case, both of us can be mutually benefited. So welcome all of you once again to this event, and all the best to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your motivating words. Now, we would like to introduce our speakers for today's session. Mr. Vignesh Kamath has investment banking coverage experience and worked with top-tier firms like SATS, Ernst and Young and Company. He received his MBA from IIM Kozhikode and has extensive professional experience. He is also recognized as one of India's most employable MBA graduates. He is also a level 3 CFA candidate and has an expertise in preparing investment banking pitches for equity, debt, and structured financial issues.
Ms. Priyanshi Srivastava is an experienced business analyst and has worked with major companies including Zomato and EXL, where she provided expertise in promotional spend management, product launch strategies, and user growth initiatives. She has proficiency in various technical skills ranging from business analytics in Python to C and Tableau. She is currently pursuing her MBA from IIM Kozhikode. The stage is all yours.
Good afternoon, Professor Lama, and students at Purimal College and everyone on call. Please confirm if you can hear me. Can you give me a little nod, or you okay? You can hear
Yes,
me.
sir.
That's great. No, sir, just call
Yes,
me
sir,
by
you
my name. I'm Vignesh. So first off, I'd like to thank you for taking out an hour of your time to dedicate to this session. We're also students, both Priyanshi and I. We we take up these sessions as well, and we understand that when you dedicate an hour, the expectation is that we're able to deliver something that we learn from this, right? So when we sat down and thought about what we wanted to deliver during the session, there's a bunch of tools out there, right? If you look at analytics, there's a bunch of tools that a bunch of organizations provide that meet a lot of goals. But I think during our professional stints, the short 2 3 years that we've worked, we've realized you don't really need an arsenal of 20 tools to get a job done. You need maybe two or three tools, right? The real sort of challenge comes in when in how you frame that entire process of how do you do this research. And so today a couple of high level pointers I'll give you before this session, before we get into it, is that we're not looking to give you an idea of 20 tools, right? We're trying to achieve in this 1 hour just how do you go about thinking about your research project, how do you think about your research project, and how do you go about executing it. We have an example. Again, a disclaimer here is it's a political example. Priyanshi and I do not support any political entity. This is just an example that we've taken up to demonstrate how we would use certain tools, right? With that, I have a few questions. First off, can you tell me about the batch a little bit, or the audience? Are you all second years, first years, final years? What is the composition of the batch?
It's basically like amalgamation of everyone. Like it's well, the event is open to all for the first as well, from the first year to the third year.
Okay, and what is the average level of familiarity with statistics? Because if you have advanced statistics majors on this call, I think they can just drop off. I don't think we are going to, teach you anything new there. But if there's, if you have people that understand basic statistics or don't know statistics, that then I think this call would help. So can you tell me just like generally how many people
Yes.
here understand
So
statistics?
basically, most of the students are from the commerce background or the commerce stream, so they are not
Okay.
that familiar with statistics. So yeah, I mean, majority of the audience will be like the session would be useful for them.
Great, perfect. Then I have just one last request is keep talking to me. If we were just to sort of put out our content, I think 10 minutes in our slides would get over and then we'd wonder, oh, what do we do now? So keep talking to us. Most of our slides involve, we need you to opine in or chip in a little bit. So that helps a lot. So whatever you need to do, message on your WhatsApp groups, wake your friends up. I think that would really help. Yeah, so that's about it from my end. Before we start with the presentation, I'll request Priyanshi to maybe share a few thoughts. Priyanshi, over to you.
Thanks, Vignesh. Hi, everyone at KMC. So, as Vignesh has already laid down all the things which we are going to cover today, just wanted to know, is there any sort of coding proficiency or some coding elective or anything you have with you so that people know at least what coding is and even the basics would work? Is that there, or is it like we just start from scratch?
Uh, I wouldn't like. I'm not sure whether there's like it's true for the entire audience, but it's better if we start from scratch, assuming that they
Cool.
have very little coding knowledge.
Cool, cool. That works completely. And feel free to ask anything. So, we would start off our session, give you an overview of what the basic tools are. And trust me, it's not about learning the maximum number of tools, but getting an expertise on the basic two or three tools, right? So, that is what the aim of our session is also. We have curated the tools which probably are the most useful. And even if you get an expertise on any three of them, you're good to go. So that's the aim. We'll keep like the 15-20 minutes at the end for Q&A. If you want to have any sort of questions, you're free to ask. Even during the session, if you have any doubts, you can just pop them in the chat and just, I don't know if there's a raise hand feature here. Yeah, there is. So you can just raise your hand here, so we can just address those questions. So Vignesh, any questions so far, I mean, before we start off? No? Cool. Vignesh, maybe you can start then.
Checking that you can see my screen and hear me again. Can someone unmute themselves and
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
perfect. Cool. So, topic for the day we all know is using analytical tools for research and analysis. Our theme was how do we use very simple analytics to unearth some powerful truths, right? Um, but before we begin, I think I want to hear uh, just how does it or why does it matter. So, if any of you could unmute and give me a broad overview of okay why research. Your professors shared some good insights on why research matters or why analytical tools matter. But I want to hear from you, like why do you think that being proficient with analytical tools is important?
May I give my insight?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think that as information is increasing day by day, we have a lot of an abundance of data. And now what we require is finding information from that raw data. How do we make sense of the information that is available to us? And that's where analytical tools will help us to draw conclusions from it.
Right. I'll tell you one thing I love about final year college students is you all have really great answers. 1 year or 2 years into work life, the answer changes slightly. The reason you want to be good at Excel or Tableau or whatever tools we bring up is just because you can get out of office that much quickly, go home and enjoy your personal time. So that's maybe sitting on the other end of the spectrum that I have an answer to, right? But again, as a college student and as a professional, one thing we're certain about is that these tools help. For us, it helps us get our work done faster, and the more proficient you are with it, your work gets that much easier, and then the associated rewards that come with being able to complete tasks successfully without errors. Your accuracy is higher, and you're able to have a faster turnaround time, right? That's the basic reason why we use or try to get proficient with these tools. Now, with the first tool that we want to talk about is Excel, right? And Excel's pretty much all encompassive, right? So in all of, and you'll see this in a moment, what Excel can do. Things Excel can do is like you can do pretty much all kinds of calculations with it. You can run simulations on it. You can prepare dashboards and reports. These are functions that typically, once you sort of look at data tools, you think, okay, maybe Tableau is built for your dashboard reporting, or specific tools are built for analysis. But Excel over the years has grown into such an encompassive tool that it sort of gives you the functionality to perform pretty much the A to Z of any job that I've looked at. So I've worked across a couple of sectors, and everywhere Excel is the go-to that professionals use to complete their tasks, right? On the side that of things that Excel can't do, here I'll ask you to opine in again. I'll ask somebody to sort of pipe in and tell me what is something Excel cannot do, on your professional front. Anyone can sort of just pipe in, and if you think there's something that you've used Excel, all of us use Excel, right? Is there something that you found that this is something I wanted to do and Excel couldn't do? I'll take that radio silence as a no, and that's great because I've also put down that there's literally nothing Excel can't do. The whole of corporate India kind of runs on this one tool, right? And that's why getting very proficient with Excel helps a lot in sort of when you do your day-to-day work. Yeah, I have a LinkedIn post in front of you. This is where I'd like to start with a simple example. I've taken a very simple example of a research study, something you could do in maybe 15-20 minutes, not even a difficult research project, but this is just to illustrate how we would go about doing a research project or a research topic on Excel, right? So the can someone so I can't see my screen. Can someone tell me if I'm still audible and the session's ongoing?
Yeah, Vignesh, it's all
Awesome.
okay.
All right. So you've got a post in front of you where a certain person on LinkedIn says that today our honorable finance minister would present the budget. A certain journalist would say that it is historic. The opposition would say it is a disaster. There would be a leftist party that has allegations that it is crony capitalism. So this sort of blueprint and the traction it has gained is for a particular reason, right? Anytime any issues raised in India, and largely political issues are raised in India, all of us, most of us, rush to express our opinion that this is how I feel about it, right? This is what the budget is. And just for my knowledge, can someone give me a key highlight of the budget? Did anybody, if any of you all have gone through the budget that was released 2 days ago, if you could just give me one insight, something that the government's come out and proposed, that would help a lot.
Cryptos would be taxed 30%.
Sure. What's another?
Introduction of 5G in 2022.
Great. So you all have seen the budget, right? You've seen the proposals that the government has come out with. One of those, and one of those significant ones, was that the government of India would increase capital expenditure, which all of us understand as spending on fixed assets or gross capital formation. Capital expenditure would be stepped up from about 5.5 lakh crores and change to 7.5 lakh crores. The rationale that the government has given all of us is that it would lead to more jobs, it would lead to higher growth, it would lead overall to the economy being boosted, right? Shortly after that, as pointed out by the LinkedIn individual, former finance secretary says it's an optical illusion. The increased capex would not serve the stated purposes, and so it is going to be a colossal failure. Now, this is a blueprint for any issue that is brought up in India. Is you have the government stating it is historic and the opposition stating that it is a complete failure. Our objective as research analysts would be to say, what does the data say, right? That is, at the end of the day, as a research analyst, we don't look at, we wouldn't want to look at conjecture. We want to know what do the numbers tell us. Yeah. And so therein is a research topic for us. But now, if we have a research topic, the first question would be, what is the question? So how do you formulate a research question, right? I want you to look at a question on the screen. It says, is budget 2022 right in boosting India's capex levels? I want any two of you, to give me your thoughts on this. Yeah, just pipe up and tell me, what do you think about this research question? Is this something that interests you? Is this a good question? Can we answer it? What do you think?
Hello.
Hey, I'm sorry, I can't see your name. Priyanshi, could you call
Yeah,
out
Divyan.
whoever's
Yeah, yeah. Divyan, go ahead. Kirti is also there, so both of you can maybe answer this.
Yeah, I feel that this question in particular, if it is proposed, then as a research point of view, we would have to look at, as the speaker pointed out, the amount of jobs, like in terms of numbers, that the amount of jobs or employment could be generated through the increased amounts of capex, like capital expenditure. Moreover, I think we would be looking at like integration of where this disintegration of where the expenditure is increased individually. Like for example, in this year's budget only, there would be an increase in manufacture of trains.
right?
So through that we could incur that companies like Bharat, like BHEL, and such companies would get more contracts, and then they could increase the employment factor of this entire question.
Sure.
So I feel that in such questions, like this is an open-ended question, we have to go into much more detail and get the details regarding where exactly the expenditure is increasing, and like which you can say strata of workers of a nation would benefit from that.
Priyanshi, can you tell me who the name of this person who answered just now?
Divyan.
Divyan, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
Divyan, that's an excellent answer. That's right on point. The problem with this question is it is so ambiguous and such an umbrella question that there is no yes or no or answer for it that we can get into without delving deeper into the details. So that's great. Let's save the next person for the next question, right? Let's look at, does boosting India's capital expenditure bear well for the populace? And to save us all a little bit of time, because you all are so spot on, I'll tell you this is also wrong for the same reasons, right? Which is, it is ambiguous. It does not tell us what is the relationship we want to test, what are the variables we want to look at. It is a broad umbrella question that can be your topic, but not really a research question, right? So, what does a research question look like? I think it looks something like this. Does boosting India's capital expenditure positively impact our economic indicators? Right here, you've got two sides to the question. Here, on one side, we're positivizing that we will increase capital expenditure. On the other side, we say what happens to our economic indicators. Fair and simple. But what happens is, in a lot of research studies, professionals often struggle with narrowing down what is their key consideration. Again, when we speak of things that are politically charged, such as the budget, there are so many factors that come in. We spoke of employment, we spoke of sectors, we spoke of the railways, that the core question gets lost. But if we go back to the previous slides, right, the core thing that the opposition, the government, and our LinkedIn experts are arguing about is, what is the impact of increasing the capital expenditure? Does it bear well for the economy, or does it, it's not a great thing for the economy? Yeah, so this, let's progress. And in the fag end of the session, in the 15 minutes we've got scheduled for Q&A, if you all have any additions to this, please feel free to let me know. That would be great. So our questions now: does boosting India's capital expenditure impact our economic indicators? The next thing you want to do is design your research, because before, so if you're excited about research, and most people are, once you start getting into the thick of it, what the tendency we have is we go straight to find the data and we say, let's bang this out right now, let's go collect data and let's answer this question right now. But sometimes what that leads to is to back and forth and back and forth, when you realize, oh, there was this one part of the research design that I missed. So it's best practice to first think about end to end, how am I going to do my research, what are the steps that are going to be involved. So I know first I need to identify my variables. Yeah, what are the variables that I want to test? What are the tests that I want to conduct? In this case, because we are looking at a predictor relationship, does boosting capital expenditure influence the economic indicators? There, I would think a regression analysis and a correlation between the two would help us understand, okay, what is the real impact of increasing capital expenditure on India's economic indicators, right? Then comes these steps of you collect data, you clean it, you ensure that it is in a readable format, and you can do analysis on it. You conduct the tests, you draw your inferences, and for in interest of completion, you do some sensitivity or scenario analysis to see, okay, if X were X, then how would Y be impacted? That's the broad structure of the research design. Um, and at the end of the day, what we're trying to accomplish here is, what does the data tell us? Is it the government that is right in boosting capital expenditure, or is it the opposition that is right in saying that this is, the word that I remember is that it's an optical illusion, right? So that's what we're trying to test here, looking at data. Yeah. Any questions so far? If you all want to shoot off, please do. Otherwise, I'll start with the first step, which is identifying the variable. And if I'm going too slow, this is very simple. Please feel free to pipe in. Let me know. We're also students, so if you want to, tell me that this is going too slow or too fast, just stop me. Tell me that we need to change our pace, and we'll do that accordingly. Great. I don't hear anything. Priyanshi, no one's got their hand raised.
Divin has his hand raised. So Divin, if you could go ahead.
Hello. I wanted to ask, like as you mentioned, these steps. In the particular step of conducting tests or like basically collecting that data that we'll
Yeah.
have to analyze. So, in many cases, especially now that the amount of data available on the internet or through newspapers, magazines is like beyond vast. We cannot comprehend it all.
Right.
So, that I wanted to ask, like, how do you, as a research analyst, would look upon to like filter that data which would help the most in your research or the topic of research?
Excellent question. You're right in saying that there is an information overload. My go-to, and each analyst, I mean, Priyanshi would have her own solution to this, as would each analyst, right? My go-to is always trust premium sources. If there is data you can't find on the premium sources, only then you revert to tier two or tier three sources. So for me, and I'll show you shortly in the collecting data step, I've got a list of like few sources that I refer to for economic data. Economic data, thankfully for us economists, is collected widely and and publicly available as well. So these sources like the IMF or the United Nations Statistics Bank or the World Bank data, these sort of serve as sufficient pools or databases for us to conduct our analysis. We don't have to delve into either offline sources like you mentioned, or go try to sort of join for questions like these, right? But like you said, for other questions, more intricate, complex ones that you want to answer, let's say something like, does an abortion ban, which the US is now widely contemplating, does an abortion ban result in more poverty or depressed social indicators? That is a great question in my mind that people have been trying to answer for a long time. It is again politically charged, religiously charged. For something like that, you would require multiple sources of data. There you would have to sort of sit down and plan it more structurally. Where am I going to source my data from? How am I going to establish credibility? But for this particular question, there are sources which I'll show you in the next few slides, which you can readily get publicly available data from.
Just to
Does that
add
answer?
on,
Yeah.
yeah, just adding on to what Vignesh is saying, sometimes it does happen that you have to answer the question where you do not have these official databases available, and you have to go out and collect data and do your analysis on it. And how do you basically get sense out of such complex, unstructured data? The key is the data cleansing part, which we will be talking about later also. So there is a technique, there is a whole methodology which is there in place, which helps you to get sense out of data which is collected from random sources. So it's not always that you will always have these databases with you. In particular case, we do, because we're talking about economic indicators. We have all these data available by the government sources itself. But something like, you're talking about some habits, you're talking about some qualitative aspects of people, you're doing some analysis on that, something like a marketing research project, which most of you must have done already or would be doing in the future. In that case, you would have to refer to those offline sources and rely on those data cleansing techniques and data analytics tools to clean that data to get sense out of it. It's not always that if there are some, let's say, 100 line items there with you, you do the analysis with those 100. Just cull that down to maybe 60. Those 60 are the ones which make sense. So that is the the process of going from 100 to those 60 is the process of analyzing it. So we'll talk about that later, and maybe Vignesh can continue.
Okay. Cool. I'll move on to the next slide then. Identifying your variables. So for the sake of this study, I've taken two variables that we want to look at. Does capital expenditure boost GDP growth? And does capital expenditure negatively impact inflation? Which is, does inflation increase so much that the point of spending, is nullified because your prices are now that much higher and your purchasing power is now, reduced. So there was no point of achieving that GDP growth, right? Two simple variables. One can argue rightly that there will be multiple other variables that should fit into this, but this is an illustrative example, right? So that makes a research question. The final question is, how does boosting India's capital expenditure impact GDP growth and inflation? And that's what we're going to test. Coming to the question that you asked, Divyan, was how do I get data, right? For me, the World Bank has always served as a good source of data. One thing I would personally do when I look at political questions is not take data from the sovereign that I am looking at. So India, if it's an Indian government like an IBEF, a database which the government collates, or an Indian Statistical Institute's ISI database, I would not use it simply for sanity of my research, which is I'm not taking data from a party which I'm questioning or testing, right? With World Bank being a more largely supranational body, we would trust, maybe, hopefully, that they don't have biases towards certain sovereigns that we're looking at. Other sources you can look at is the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, Census Bureau Economic Indicators, Bureau of Labor Statistics. That one particularly helps for a lot of human development indicators. IMF again is very helpful, especially for financial and monetary, studies that you would do as commerce students, and the United Nations Statistics Division. And these are, if you see this little screen I have in front of you, some of you all would have seen it, I'm sure. But for those of you that are seeing this for the first time, it's a very intuitive, sort of website. You can go download data in pretty much any format, even build an API. I'm sure this is something that Priyanshi is more well versed with, where you can source data on a lifetime basis. You don't even have to go really download and keep plugging in the data. In the interest of time, I'll run through my the rest of my research a little quickly. This is a extract of the data that we got. When you look at it, if tell me what makes sense, because for me nothing made sense, right? If you look at it, just a bunch of numbers. It's got a bunch of countries, and so if at a nutshell, just in this screenshot, there is nothing useful for me, right? I want Indian data, and I wanted a couple of indicators. So that's where your cleaning steps come in. I'm sure Priyanshi will shed more light on this, but generally what you want to do when you're cleaning is kind of get the data that you want and make sure that you're plugging in any simple things like missing data, or if you see any units are here and there. And we look at one example of that, right, which is when I got this data, when I downloaded it, and this was last night. I when I downloaded it, I saw that the gross fixed capital formation, what I was using as a variable for my capex, is given in the local currency units, right? So if you look at this number, 254 crore 90 lakhs odd, whatever, you've got a huge number here is the capital expenditure in a given year in 1960. Whereas the other indicators on the side are my GDP growth and inflation, which are in percentage. Now, you cannot apply a regression on, or at least a simple linear regression on this basis, right? So simple things that you want to do when you clean your data is understanding how to create a variable. A simple variable that I created here was GFCF growth. Just that then it helps us to sort of express the capex as well in percentages. Now all three variables of ours are in percentages, right? Your capital expenditure, GDP growth, and the inflation. So in any given year, let's say in 1961, what I'm saying is the capex, Indian government's capex increased by 15%, 0.15%. Your In that year, the GDP growth was 3.7%, and your inflation was 1.6%. That's how I would interpret the cleaned data that we have in front of us. Yeah, so now that we've got our clean data, we run a few analysis on it. The first thing I typically do when I have a data sheet in front of me, and something most of us do, right? So if if most of you feel like this is something that's covered, please feel free to stop me. Descriptive statistics is something I run just to get a sense of what is the data tell me. So from 1961 to 2020, generally the capex has been increasing at around 0.13% each year. We think that capex must be increasing by 5%, 10%, but typically the mean increase in capex is 0.13%. GDP growth has been at a high 5% that we've grown from 61 to 2020 year on year. Every year is the mean is 5%. And inflation, surprisingly, is at 7.4%. So India's prices have been skyrocketing if we look at it from the 1961 to 2020. And this is the same insight we'd get if we ask any of our aged folk at home that they'd say, हम बचपन में हमें इतने रुपए का ये मिलता था. So that what does the data tell us? The data tells us that they were probably right about it, right? Inflation is at 7, GDP growth is at 5, and each year capital expenditure increases at about 0.13%. The other indicators here are something that we'd be familiar with when we do the data. Maybe one thing I'll point out here is the range. So if we look at the range, what we see is the capex is not a very dynamic variable. The highest and lowest capex के बीच का जो difference है, that is a meager 0.34%. So in any given year, a government is likely to only increase it either this side or this side. The delta is only 0.34%. But the GDP has a significant range. So in any year, there was a range of 16% difference. So what that means is there might have been a contraction of -3% in one year, and there was an growth of 13% in another year. So the range on the GDP is high. The range on the inflation, if you see, is super high. It's 36%. What does that tell us? That the most volatile of our economic indicators in India is the inflation index. In a given year, inflation might have been -4%. There might have been a contraction in prices. Then there could have been another year of hyperinflation where prices went up 32%. This is what the data tells us between 1961 to 2020. This just descriptive statistics gives me an idea of, okay, what does my data really tell me, or where does it lie, and a general sense of, okay, these are the points I should look out for, or any outliers I should look out for. Moving on, the first analysis I ran was a correlation to see how does capital expenditure tie up with GDP growth and inflation. What is the correlation between the two? Difference between correlation and regression is very simple. Most of you might already know this, but in the interest of completion, I'll tell you, is correlation tells us the two-way relationship. So what is, how much does GDP growth impact capital expenditure, and how much does capital expenditure impact GDP growth? Basically, how do they move in tandem? Whereas regression is a causal analysis. When I take one variable, how does that variable impact another? So there's a causal relationship there, right? That's the basic difference between the two. Both are tools used to test relationships between two variables or more. When we look at this data in front of us, the first thing that pops to mind, and I had planned to sort of ask you guys to opine here, but in the interest of time, let's just go ahead and look at it. Capital expenditure and GDP growth are linked 36%, which means there's a a decent amount of correlation between your GDP growth and your capital expenditure. They both move together. Inflation and capital expenditure also move together, which means when capital expenditure increases, there is inflation, however, to a lower extent than the GDP. What does our takeaway here say? Our takeaway says capital expenditures are linked closer to GDP growth than to inflation. And thereby, we award our incumbent government 1 point, and the opposition is yet to open their account. That would be my preliminary takeaway from just looking at the correlation matrix. Any quick questions at this stage, or can I move on to the regression analysis? Great, I'll take that as a no. Regression, I ran a simple regression. This is, for most of you again, might be aware, but for those who aren't, regression here shows what is the impact of increasing capital expenditure on the GDP growth, right? And here there are a couple of tables in front of you. This output is what you get when you run a regression analysis. Running a regression analysis is very simple. If I have my Excel open in front of me, Excel data analysis regression, say okay, and you've got a box here. You put in your variables, and it gives you a tab where you've got your output, and this is the output we see on the slide deck, right? Very simple stuff. For few of you don't know, this is something you can go on YouTube and learn in 5 minute stops, right? But the idea here is to understand what the analysis tells us. Doing it is very easy, right? But what does the analysis tell us? The first thing it tells us is this 18.82 here, if you can see my pointer, is a coefficient that tells us that anytime your capital expenditure increases by 1%, your GDP grows by 0.18%. Yeah, so there is now a quantitative number on when you increase your capital expenditure, since the 61 to 2020, what is the average impact that it would have had on the GDP growth? Our GDP growth would have increased by 0.18. Our GDP would have grown by 0.18% faster because of 1% increase in capital expenditure, right? The second number I would look at in a regression analysis, those of you who've done it and are familiar with it would know, is the p value. What does the p value tell me? Are these results significant or not? Meaning, if these results are not significant, there is no point of sort of looking at this 8.18%. That's just a spurious relationship, right? But here, a p value, the way we interpret it is, if it's lower than the level of significance, I can take here even a 1% level of significance. And LOS is, again, simple terms, you can Google this later. In a very broad sense, LOS just tells me how confident am I in my results. A 1% LOS would mean I'm 99% sure that whatever I'm concluding is right. So even if I take a 99% LOS, which is high, right? I'm 99% sure about my results. Even then, this 0.00, the way we interpret it, means that this result is significant. What does that mean? In a broadest sense, since 61 to till 2020, there is a significant relationship that exists between capital expenditure and GDP growth. Every time capital expenditure was increased by 1%, GDP growth is expected to go up by 0.18%. This is my interpretation from this table here. And ANOVA table is again reinforces the same conclusion that I've taken using a different test called an F test. Something that you all might be familiar with, but if you're not, please feel free to Google it. It's fairly simple. And then the table up top here, regression statistics, is an interesting one. Here is where we run into an issue. The R square it tells us how much percentage of variation in the dependent variable is explained by the independent variable, right? So here, what the conclusion that I draw from this is only 13%, 0.13 here, only 13% of the GDP growth can be explained by capital expenditure. So far, NDA is smiling. The incumbent government is smiling, saying, I have proved to you from your data that there is a significant positive relationship between your capital expenditure and your GDP growth. But the R square is where a research analyst thinks the only 13% of the GDP growth is explained by capital expenditure. What about the remaining 87%, right? These would be the large conclusions that I derive from this regression analysis. That's where we stop it at, right? So here's the few takeaways that we discussed. Positive impact of capex on GDP growth is 0.18% increase. There is a significant relationship. However, you have a low R squared and scattered residuals here. Again, you can Google what that means in the interest of time. Scattered residuals just mean that the capital expenditure is not able to explain a large portion, 87% of the GDP growth. So what we do for that is we give zero point 0.5 points to both the opposition and the government. Government is right in saying that capital expenditure does boost GDP growth since 1961 to 2020, but opposition is right in saying that that factor is a very, very small factor. It's only 13% of the total GDP growth can be accounted for capital expenditure, right? Did the same thing with inflation. I'll keep the screen on for 30 seconds so we can look at the coefficient here. Again, it would be 0.16% inflation goes up when your capital expenditures increase by 1%. The difference here is you see this p value where my pointer is, if that's visible, this relationship is not significant, right? The way we would interpret this is there is no significant relationship between 1961 to 2020 between capital expenditure and inflation. So every time you increase capital expenditure, you'd expect government is spending money, people are getting money, people are spending money, inflation should go up. The conventional economic commerce sense says when government spends money, the inflation indicator should rise. What does the data tell us? It doesn't, right? Even if we look at the R square, which I talked about, capital expenditure explains a meager 5% of the inflation that has happened since 1961 to 2020. Our conclusions from that are very simple. Insignificant relationship. The coefficients or the tables tell us that the relationship between capital expenditure and inflation is not significant. Right here, we give points to the government for coming out and saying that capital expenditure is actually a good thing for the economy. It is able to boost GDP growth without having a larger impact on inflation that nullifies the advantage of the capital expenditure. So I hope you all are with me so far. If I'm going too slow or too fast, let me know. These were two sort of analysis that I conducted to see what the data tells us. about the government's budget proposal, are they right in historically, have they been right in their associations or not? Key inferences from these tests were capital expenditure boosts GDP growth. Capital expenditure in itself is insufficient to boost GDP because we saw that only a small portion of GDP growth is explained by enhancing our capital expenditure, and then it does not adversely affect inflation. These were the two regression analyses that we run. So, concluding this, what does the data tell us? The data tells us that the government is probably on the right side more than the opposition when they look at the budget proposal of increasing capital expenditure. Going by historical trends, the budget proposal of increased capital expenditure will likely boost GDP growth if it is paired with other conducive factors. And I'm so glad that on this call, Divyan, I think, was the one who mentioned that there should be other factors which we should include. And these are a few of these are mentioned here: your workforce participation, your education. But there are lots of factors that we can do, can include within our model, make it a multiple linear regression, and then your predictive accuracy increases. You have a higher percentage of that R square, basically saying that our model will be able to explain larger parts of the GDP growth that has happened since 61 to 2020, and thereby we would also be able to criticize the government then. So if any of you want to take this up as a project and then email me about it, I would be delighted. If you want to include more variables and say, okay, this is where these are the variables that actually impact GDP growth, increase predictive accuracy, then we go back to the government and we say, as a research analyst, okay, I noticed capital expenditure has been increased. You're right in doing that, but X, Y, Z variables have a larger impact or also have a large impact on GDP growth. In your budget, we do not see that these have been given enough of a push. Can you explain why this is so? That I would think is one way a research analyst would use the data to explain or discover whether the budget proposals meet their stated aims or are likely to meet their stated aims or not. With that, I'll conclude my side of this and hand it over to Priyanshi. Priyanshi, I'm so sorry for extending my time. Please go ahead.
No worries. I think a lot of insights have already been there with the people here at KMC about how to do the research, because that is very important. Any analysis, anything will happen only after you've collected data and you've done some sort of research on it. That's what's very well covered by Vignesh. So now I'll talk about some of the tools. I'll basically talk about three major tools, and rest of the tools I'll just give an overview about. You can maybe analyze, or you can um, search upon it more on over the Google, or there's so many other websites available. I'll tell you that also. So first one is VBA. Since we were talking about Excel, so you must have noticed, if you worked with Excel, that sometimes there are so many rows and you end up doing the same operation over and over again. For, let's say, you have to, like, a very small example is, like, let's say you have names written from row number 2 to row number 36, and you have to color the names which are starting with, let's say, S. Now you would manually go there, select those, put the color in. You'll repeat the same process over and over again, right? Now, what if you get the power of just clicking a button? You just do one operation, the computer learns it, you click a button, and that thing happens automatically. So that is what VBA does. VBA is like a coding language which is powered by Excel, right? So here, one is that you actually go out there and write the VBA code, particularly like what do you want to do. It's a little difficult, honestly. I mean, you have all the resources available on Google, so on and so forth. But the easier method here is, there is also the facility that you do your operations, you record it, okay, and the computer learns that and it just throws it when you click it. So that is what we call as recording macros. So for example, I will not like go into detail of how exactly we would do it. I mean, all these videos are available on YouTube, you can see that. But just showing you how like a VBA screen looks like on the left side of the screen. If you look, this is a code, basically a VBA code. Something, I mean, you do your operations on the workbook which is open, and it just line by line it runs, line by line it does the operation which is mentioned here. When I talk about macros, there is also a button which says you have to start record, you have to stop record, and view the macro. So let's say we have this table, name, employee ID, department, okay, and I tell you that filter all the departments which are filter all the employee IDs which are greater than, let's say, 12,000. Okay. Now, instead of like, and let's say I give this data and I keep on appending more and more data. Now every time you will not go manually and search, right? Okay, this is the filter, I'll apply filter, put greater than 12,000. What you will do it, you just click on start recording, you will put that filter, click on greater than 12,000. When you get the result, you will click on close recording, stop recording. Okay, and you have this whole saved. What you have to do now, you just have to go on, you have to select this recording, which is basically the macro. You just have to click on run macro, and everything will happen automatically, right? So this is what happens. This is magic basically, that you don't have to literally code everything, you can actually just record which is happening on the screen. Next slide please. So that was VBA. That was something really basic. Now we'll talk about something more interesting, more analytics per se. So when I was at Zomato, I'll just give one reference. So Harsheen, I'll take your doubt just after this, okay? So when I was in Zomato, so we used to get data which was, I mean, every day we used. I mean, Zomato's order volume is almost close to 1 to 2 million, okay, per day. So we used to get such a high amount of data every day on a, I mean, hourly basis, okay. Now imagine if I put so much data on an Excel and then analyze it, I will be screwed because so much data, first of all, won't fit into that Excel, and secondly, how will I even analyze it? And that is where SQL comes into picture. SQL is a querying language which basically helps you to dive into the database. You write a piece of code, you write a query, and it pulls out the required data. Let's say my manager one day comes to me and says, okay, Priyanshi, Gurgaon's order volume is really dropping. And it's like in the night, I don't know, like yesterday and the week before, we used to get, let's say, 50,000 orders, and now we are getting 20,000 orders. Can you diagnose what is happening? This is a typical problem, okay, you get at companies like Zomato, Swiggy. So now what I will do is I cannot go and see, like, download the entire database and then filter Gurgaon and see the order volumes. What I'll do is I'll simply write a piece of code saying, database, please give me data of Gurgaon dated, let's say, 2 weeks back to till date. And I will get an hourly data. And I'll also take a data, take data for, let's say, Bangalore to compare. कि ऐसा तो नहीं है, Bangalore maybe same trend है. And just that my manager is just getting worried. It's just like a nationwide trend which is going on. So I'll literally take out the data which I require. That's it. And SQL helps you do that. So this is just like a meme which I found on the net and I thought I will paste it here. So SQL is really, really important if you talk about analytics. And if I also talk about the 10 most in-demand data science skills, Python was rated on the first and SQL was rated on the second. So it's like even if you're coding on Python, even in VB as a matter of fact, in background, wherever the data pulling is being done, it is being done on SQL. And there are a lot of offshoots of SQL. There's no SQL, there is Postgres, there's so many other things. But the basic querying is something which you all should learn in any of the jobs you go, right? So that is what SQL does. Now, this thing which you're seeing here, I don't know if you're like a little scared from where group by what nonsense is this? This is basically the querying language which SQL uses. Okay, these are the keywords. So let's say I want to fetch order IDs from order table. Okay, so I will write select the order IDs from, let's say, table, order table. Okay, these are all these keywords which are being used in while you're querying, and it depends upon the context which is being there for you to like fetch the data for. This you can actually research, and if you have any questions we can address here. And I'll also take up the question which Harsheen was asking. Harsheen, go ahead please.
Yes, I wanted to ask if I create a macro on one workbook, will that also I can also run that in another workbook or in the same workbook only if it will work?
Yeah, it will work on the same workbook, but if you want to like use it on the other workbook, you can either duplicate the whole thing over there, or you can create a new macro. But the macro is just it just works on the workbook you open for.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So next slide, please. Yeah. So here, I mean, I cannot teach you querying in just like 10 minutes. So I thought I'll just give you a very small example of how querying looks like. Okay. So here we have a table which says ID, fruit name, fruit color. Now, if you have to fetch something like you have to select all the fruits where the color is red. Okay. You have to select everything where the color is red. So you simply write select star from fruits. Fruits is the table name where fruit color is equal to red. It's plain English, honestly. It's very intuitive, and I don't think it'll take you more than a week to learn how querying happens. And it is very interesting also. I mean, this is just one table you're querying from. I'll show you how this thing gets more and more complex and very interesting actually. For example, now if I ask you to fetch something like any fruit name which starts with the letter L. Okay. Now here you have to write select star from fruits where fruit name like L. Now here I'm not specifying what is the exact fruit name I want. I'm just saying starts with L. So I'll put an L and a percentage sign after that. Percentage sign means that any character can come after it. So that is the coding, you can say, characters which are used, and it is common through all mostly every coding language. Similarly, if I ask you to select like top two fruits, okay, you just have to write select top two from fruits. That's it. It's very intuitive. It's all English. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, now what if you have multiple tables? Now you have to join the tables. Right now, we were just talking about the case where there was just one table. Let's say you have five tables. Now, what is needed is you need a primary key. Again, I found a very good meme, so I put it here. Sorry if I mean if this was a formal setting and I was really killing that, but I felt it's better we do it in a little fun way. So let's say we have like a table which has a primary key ID and name and address to it. And there's another table which has ID and some other ID and some action. Now, these two tables, you can see there is one common column that is ID. Okay. And maybe we can actually combine both these tables together using this ID column. That is what we call as joining. And there are various types of joins. There is left join, right join, inner join, full join. You learn how to use these joins in class. And there's a way of writing. This whole query ka snippet which you see here. Okay, don't get anxious कि ये क्या लिख दिया है ये क्या है बिल्कुल easy है. It's just that I'm not explaining it right now because it's a very set procedure of writing it. And once you get your hands on more, you'll be able to understand ये exactly ऐसे क्यों लिखते हैं. So the idea here is to understand, okay, there is this concept of joining tables using primary key and foreign key. There's a concept of joins where you join tables together, and that is what SQL is, honestly. Moving on to the next slide. Cool. Now let's come down to Python. Python, I'm sure you all must have heard about, and I'm sure you all must be very excited. Some of you might have even worked on Python. But why Python is my question. Anybody has any answer for it? Why Python is so hyped?
Basically, it's all based on packages. They are pre-developed packages, so which is easy to use when compared to like a language like C. So there's where Java and Python have an edge. So
That's correct, Yash. So I mean, Python. So basically, everything has evolved from C, C++. Okay, all these languages were the very basic languages, and Python has made so while you're writing a piece of code, especially for starters, it's like it's always this hassle of putting brackets, curly brackets. You have to do indentation. You have to like write it in a very set format, and it's like for everything you have to write the whole loop, write everything all together. Like even if I'm putting a loop there, I have to write the whole loop. But Python, as Yash perfectly mentioned, it gives you those pre-packages, pre-installed libraries which actually help you to do all these things at ease. And Python has removed the whole hassle of having full stops, commas, um, curly brackets. You just need to indent, and that automatically actually happens once you press enter, right? So that is what Python is, and you can do almost everything on Python. You can do web scraping if supposedly someone asks you ki, it's a very interesting problem. Okay, and there was one of my friends who actually did this. So he was trying to book a movie ticket, And what was happening was whenever he went on the site, it just showed seats are not available. So what he did was he wrote a web scraping code. And what the web scraping code did was whenever there was a seat availability, it sent him a notification. Now everything, this whole piece of code, like just, the your Python will basically keep on searching for, I mean, it will scrape the whole web page, and the moment it sees something on the screen, it will send a notification. It is done via Python has this beautiful soup, it's the name of the library, which helps you do things like these. So it's really interesting. I mean, you can actually pursue any of these coding projects as your side project, as your hobby. And especially if you are in the field of commerce and you have such a coding project as your side project, it will really look great on your CV. So you can pursue, and a lot of resources available on the net. So I'll show you one example which I took from Kaggle. Kaggle is a data science come mecca, you can say. You have like a lot of coding challenges, coding problems, data sets available over there. And you can actually try to code anything and everything, and you can also get all sorts of help available over there. Vignesh, can you move on to the next slide? So there was one problem which was basically Titanic learning from disaster. Okay. Now here the problem is, I mean, what you have to basically do is you have to predict basis these are the variables. Okay. Age, ticket, fare, the cabin, the sex of the person, survival rate, whether he did survive or not. You have this data available of the passengers who traveled on Titanic. Okay. And now once I give you like a dummy data, will you be able to predict basis this data ki this passenger XYZ, will he survive or not? Yes or no? Okay, now this basically is a machine learning problem, which is you can do it on R, you can do it on Python. I'm covering Python today, so I'll just tell you how this whole process happens. So um, any analytics, okay, anything, it starts with data collection. Vignesh told you exactly how data collection happens. Then happens data cleansing. Then you do the exploratory data analysis. Then you finally analyze and you give your suggestions and recommendations. Okay, this is the four-step process which actually happens. And once you're running some sort of model, you have to split the data into two parts. One has to be your training data set, one has to be your test data set. Training data set is basically the data set where you train your model, on which this whole model will learn whether, I mean, on what specifications do I say that this passenger has the propensity to survive or not. So that is the training data set which we talk about, right? And the same model, once it learns from the training data set, we'll apply it to the test data set and finally give us results. That is how a machine learning model works. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking about the first part, data cleansing, I'll just give a small reference to what Vignesh showed you. If you notice the Excel file which he showed you, and there were a lot of missing fields, there was a lot of data which was not there, it was inconsistent. Imagine if you get such sort of inconsistent data and you're running your model over it. Don't you think the accuracy of model will be really, really low? And you have to actually cure that. I mean, you have to do it. There is no other option. So here, for example, there was this heat map which basically we tried to draw for all the variables, and we saw in the column cabin and age there were a lot of missing fields. Okay, and these missing fields will actually lead to the imbalance in the model, and we need to do something about it. Now what do we do? I mean, if anybody has suggestions that you have so many missing fields, what do you think can be done? Any suggestions? Anyone? Any? I mean, even if you feel you can try something and tell me.
Uh, Maybe we can modify our question statement according to the available data. Mm, for example, in the question that we were discussing,
Hmm.
if like for example, if we don't have the required GDP indicators
Hmm.
over the past, like if we are taking a time period of the past 60 years, and if we feel that we only have concrete data of say 5 to 10 years, so that question statement I feel somewhere would lose its relevance, because we are not able to support it with concrete data like from the past itself, only a small percentage of the past 60 years if it is available, then the question statement would lose its relevance. So I feel that maybe we could take into factor other like other factors as well, and modify our like question statement according to that.
Okay, that is one way of looking at the problem. I mean, you can definitely modify it, but sometimes you actually can't do it. Like, if supposedly the data requires you to have GDP values, and maybe you can actually put in some other columns, you can actually modify it, because GDP is something which you get from the government, right? So, I mean, if this information is not available, you can really not do anything. But let's say if you're doing a marketing research, and a very simple question is ki, you want to find out whether people will buy Sunsilk shampoo in yellow color bottle or pink color bottle. Very simple question. You have to go out and get a sample done from the public. You go out, give survey forms, you get this information, and you find out, okay, what is the maximum people choosing? I mean, is there even any color preference in people or not? So here you cannot change the question, right? You have to do something with the data only. And if supposedly some of the people end up submitting forms without actually marking anything, and you get empty rows, what do? You simply remove those rows from your analysis. That's the basic, most easiest thing to do. If your analysis has empty rows, just remove those rows. If that will basically cut down your sample space, like let's say I am having my sample space of 20 people, and if let's say 30 of them have not filled anything, I will choose my sample space as 170, no problem. And let's say if supposedly somebody has filled some inconsistent things, okay, something which I know is maybe somebody did it by some error, by mistake, something like that, what I can do is I can impute those values as the average of the whole thing. Let's say I'm talking about some prices, okay, I'm asking if somebody is buying Sunsilk ka pink color wala bottle shampoo ka, what is the average price if anybody is ready to pay. Let's say everybody prices 50 rupees, 55, 60, 70, and there's some random person who answers 10. Somebody answers rupees 2. I know that is not possible, right? What I'll do is I'll take an average of the rest, which comes out to be, let's say, around 55, and I'll remove that rupee 2 value and I'll replace it with 55. That is called missing value imputation, basically. Basically, if a value is wrong, or if it is like an outlier, you basically impute that value to the average of the data set which is available. So these are some of the methods which you can actually do to clean the data in a way. And sometimes you can actually just remove those columns, like what Divyan was also mentioning, in a way that if GDP is not available, if that is inconsistent, maybe we can look at some other columns. So that is also something which can be done. Here maybe in this particular case we realize that maybe we can just, there's so many missing values in the column cabin that it's impossible to impute it. Let's remove this column altogether. I'll do my analysis based on the rest of the columns. So that's how I actually see the data. I see whether it is inconsistent or not, how many outliers are there, and then I make a smaller data set which is cleaner and has the data which I require only for my analysis. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now I have cleaned the data. I had the data, I cleaned the data. Now I need to look at what sense is the data making. Right now, what I will do is, there are a lot of charts. You can have line graphs, you can have bar charts, you can have box plots. All these type of plots help you see, is there any correlation coming in, what's the type of trend which is coming. It just gives you a sense of data. Here if you see, there's this whole survival, whether the person survived 0 1, he did not survive with 0, it survived with 1. And what is there any relation with class? So if you see, the maximum number of people who died were lying in class 3. So here we see, okay, there is some sort of relation which is coming up. And why this is required, why this is important, is because once you actually train your model to the actual data, you have to see if it is consistent with this, because this is the reality. So hence you need a reality check of how data looks like. And once you train the model, you will see that whether it is in check or not. And also sometimes what you have to do is, there is this data which is like, let's say, female male female male, it's in alphabets, okay, and your model runs on numbers. Now how do I convert this female into number? That's a very big challenge. what I'll do is I'll create two columns, female, male, and I'll just write 0 and 1. If the guy, if I mean, if the column, sorry, if the row is, let's say, male, male will be 1, female will be 0. So this is called creating categorical variables. This is another process which we do if we have to convert columns which are in text format into numbers so that we can run models on top of it. Next slide, please. Now, we have got the EDA, we have everything. Now I just need to write the model. I mean, I just have to write the code for the model. I'm running a logistic regression here. What Vignesh had shown you earlier was linear regression. Here I'm talking about logistic regression. Logistic regression is basically another type of regression which basically predicts in 0 and 1. Okay, it gives you just one value based on your previous data. What linear regression was doing was giving you, based on the trend line, what will be the final result. It was not telling you कि ये yes होगा या ये no होगा. It was telling you that exact value. But logistic regression gives you value in terms of 0 and 1. Okay, and there are various ways of analyzing what your result is, I mean, whether it's good or not. Because of COVID, I'm sure a lot of people must have heard things like jo rapid antigen test hai, you get a lot of false positives, or you can say false negatives. Now, have you ever wondered what exactly false positive, false negative is? So it's something which comes out of a confusion matrix, and this confusion matrix is actually used to predict whether the result out of this logistic regression is good or bad. True positive means that your predicted class matches with the true class. False negative means your prediction was negative. Sorry, your I'm so sorry, your actual may the result was negative, but your prediction was opposite of that. Okay, so your true negative and true positive are the two classes which are right. The other two predictions are completely wrong. And here, when we try to draw a confusion matrix for the data which we had, we saw, I mean, most of the cases, like 150 observations and 73 observations, were falling in the right bracket. It was just like a small delta of, let's say, 10-15%, which was falling in the wrong bracket, which means our predictive model is going the right way. And I'm not just restricting to the confusion matrix. There are many other ways you can actually test the result of a logistic regression, whether it's correct, whether it's not. If it's not correct, you can make changes to your model. You can go back to your model, change the data. Basically, maybe your data, I mean, your model is incorrect because you have inconsistent data, like I showed you earlier. So that's how this whole process happens. I mean, that is the beauty of running a model and seeing whether, I mean, how the result comes out. And I mean, once you run this model, you just run it on the test data, and everything happens in the same way as I showed you right now. So this is what I wanted to talk about in Python, and I have almost covered everything. If you have any questions here.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Actually, I had a query for Mr. Kamath.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, yeah, I wanted to ask actually, in the example that you took of the GDP indicators, I felt that the in that particular example, the amount of data that was taken for the past 60 years, as we took from 1960 to 2020,
Yeah.
wouldn't you say that taking like a range of data that is somewhat more recent would be more logical in this context? Because like I believe that maximum data should be taken, but when we started the question statement was in response to the opposition, like from the opposition party, the the questions arise from the opposition party. So they would be looking at somewhat more recent figures, I would believe, that every 5 years it's an election, so they have to go at 5-year basis, I would believe, in that phase what the government is doing. So wouldn't you think that in that particular case it would make more sense to take more recent data, so that if positive or negative, both can be more like sensibly given, like a more sensible answer could be given to the question.
And also adding to Divyan's point, we started taking data from 1960s. So 1960 to 1990s were like socialist period for India, right? Around 1992 we started opening up. So after
Yeah,
that there's a two halves of data there, right? 1990 to 2020, 22.
yeah, I
So
also feel the same. Like because somewhat the social structure was like north and south, you can say.
yeah,
Great, guys. So, first off, the only mistake you made there is you called me Mr. Kamath. Just call me Vignesh. That's about it. Other than that, thanks for staying on 20 minutes longer than the session. So, those of you all who want to drop off, please feel free. If there's even 5 people left on this call, I don't mind staying on. I'm sure Priyanshi doesn't mind staying on. To answer your question, that is a great point that you raised. Does the relationship change over the years? And that's a test I did. But I have to admit to you and confess to you that this test was run at 5 in the morning. So I was also, not too inclined to push it further. The basic test that I did was on the residuals to see whether my predicted models fit changes over the years in the 60s to the 2020 period. As you've rightly pointed out, during the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, the relationship between the capex and the GDP growth was not as strong as it has been of late. Lately, the residuals are bunching around the predicted model, which basically indicates that over the past 10, 15, 20 years, there is a stronger relationship between the capital expenditure and the GDP growth. Now, that's just by looking at the residuals, right? There can be more tests that you can run on it. You can do a Watson statistic or a Durbin Watson test to see exactly how that data is changing. The problem you're referring to here is what happens when the fundamental relationship changes, like you said, in a pre 1991 or post 1991 or whatever. There are two different classes of data. In that case, the typical resolution is to have two regressions run. You run one regression on the pre 1991 data, one on the post 1991 data, and there you would conclude that okay, in a post 1991 scenario, maybe the government is even more right. So, point very well made. I concede, and I'm really happy to see that this is how I want you guys to think. This is not really about the study that we were doing, but more about how do you think as a research analyst. What you said is exactly how I think a research analyst should think. Great point, guys. Thank you. Any other questions?
I have one personally for Priyanshi. When you did the missing value treatment, you removed all the rows, right? All the row line elements.
Yeah.
So, when I noticed that heat map, I noticed that there were a lot of missing values in those two columns. One was cabin, I don't remember the other one. So, won't that reduce the sample size to less and would create a sampling bias? Or
Yeah, so I actually mentioned since that cabin column was having so many missing values, I removed the column entirely.
okay, okay, sure,
Yeah.
thank you.
So because of course, you're absolutely right. That will reduce my whole sample space. And there's this whole rule in statistics that if you have a sample space less than 30, it's useless. So you have to have it more than 30. So I removed the column entirely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other question we have?
Ma'am, would it be correct to state that business analysis requires one to have a background in both commerce and computers? Like, is programming an essential to become an analyst?
So it's not required that you have all these skills. These are some of the skills which you actually learn as you go out in your corporate life day by day. So when I started off, even I did not know. I just knew basic coding. I had zero idea about what SQL is, Python is, and as and when projects came in, I learned them on the way. So this is one very important skill which is required in business analytics, is that you have that power to accept any project and learn the skills as you go along. And trust me, there is Stack Overflow, which is the god of everything. You have all solutions to all problems over there. So you will never be stuck. You'll have people around you to help you, and you will just learn everything on the go.
Thank you, sir and ma'am, for clarifying all our doubts with your insights. After such a wonderful and interactive session, I would like to invite our president, Yash Sakuja, to deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kushi. And just one final question from both of you. I'm receiving a lot of queries from other attendees of the session, that will the PPT and all the data like PPT and Excel file or whatever resources have been used, would that be available to them, or will it be?
Yeah, yes, I've already emailed it to
Yeah.
in your cell.
Yes.
Also, just like we've been on these calls, right? So I'll tell you, there's no need for an elaborate vote of thanks. Don't call us sir or ma'am. The moment you all start working, you'll realize even a managing director prefers to be called by name. Just call everybody by name. Call your
I'm aware of
professors sir or ma'am if they like it. Call
that. I'm
everybody
aware
else
of
by name.
that.
There's no need for a vote of thanks. We honestly enjoyed the session. Maybe Priyanshi can just say a couple of words from our end. Otherwise, it's good. It's chill. We actually loved interacting with you guys. Priyanshi,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
Thank you so much. So I don't.
It was like, yeah, it was definitely a very lovely interaction with everyone here. And I mean, it's like, when Divyan asked me that question, I actually really understood, how different perspective of people come in. Like, I'm sure he comes from a finance background, and that's why his way of thinking is very inclined to that. And, somebody from a marketing background would have a very different question altogether. And that's the beauty of such discussions, such sessions. And really, thanks to you guys, we got an opportunity to interact with you all. And I really hope not like 10%, even 1% takeaway if you guys had today. It'll be like job done for the both of us today.
Definitely, like we enjoyed the session a lot. Like I personally have a lot of takeaways, and I come from a data background. So even for the people who are very new to this, it was very insightful session, and special mention to the memes that you put in. Thanks for that, and thank you so much. I won't make it too formal for you guys with a vote of thanks. So let's keep it chill, and thank you so much. And if anyone other than me wants to add anything, you're free to do so.
Yeah, I just want to ask one last question from Vignesh. So, since we all know that you are an investment banking analyst as well, so can you just help us understand what are the skills required in order to become a good investment banking analyst?
Courage. Um, Skills in India, all of us have the same skills. ठीक है? Excel पे shortcuts सबको पता होता है. And I'll speak very candidly now, extremely candidly. सबके पास same skills होती हैं. Degree कोई थोड़ा CAT में better कर लेता है तो degree थोड़े better college से मिल जाती है, या कोई somebody goes to JBIMS, somebody goes to an IIM, somebody goes to an ISB. In the end, courage matter करता है. मैं जब आउटरीच करता हूँ लोगों को 4 बार रिजेक्ट होता हूँ तो मेरे को लगता है मे बी आई शुड स्टॉप बगिंग पीपल, मे बी आई शुड स्टॉप टॉकिंग टू पीपल. बट वो करेज ये करना कि आई वांट दिस जॉब, ठीक है, आई वांट टू बिकम एन इन्वेस्टमेंट बैंकिंग एनालिस्ट, आई वांट टू बिकम Priyanshi in BCG, which is one of the most difficult companies to get into even at an IIM. And she can maybe tell you after this for 15-30 seconds how she did it. But in my opinion, all of these skills come second to courage and persistence. बस पढ़ते रहो. If you're interested in the field, and this is very cliche, right? But if you're interested in the field that you want to get into, I genuinely love finance, is what I think. अंदर से ना वो finance कूट कूट के सब प्यार निकलता है. So if you love the field you're in, and you have that courage कि मैं लोगों से बात करते ही रहूँगा, चाहे 4 बार मुझे कोई LinkedIn रिक्वेस्ट ना एक्सेप्ट करे या कोई मुझे ना बोल दे, तो भी मैं जाके लोगों से I will bother them and I will talk to them. By in the next 2-3 years you will become an investment banking analyst. It does not take any super skill or course. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, Coursera or an academy wale वगैरह, no offense to them, सब काट ही रहे हैं. It's not about you'll do a course and then you'll become an investment banking analyst. अंदर से अगर वो courage होता है तो बिल्कुल बन जाओगे. You will. You don't have to worry. अगर तुम ये कॉल सुन रहे हो ना, that itself shows me कि you have that drive कि कुछ सुनना है या कुछ सीखना है. That itself means you'll achieve something in your career. डरने की बात नहीं है. That's my 2 cents. Priyanshi, please share BCG experience.
Yeah, I mean, I also like completely second what Vignesh just said. It's all about persistence, honestly. So you have to find out where you like have your passion in. For me, analytics was something I really, really loved. Like all the 3 years of my life before coming for an MBA, I thoroughly enjoyed my work. And if not MBA, I would have definitely gone to become a data scientist. So that was something I really liked, and I really enjoyed when I worked in strategy. That how this whole